One is no poverty, two is zero hunger, three is good health and well-being, four is quality education, five is gender equality, six is clean water and sanitation, seven is affordable and clean energy, eight is decent work and economic growth, nine is industry innovation and infrastructure, 10 is reduced inequalities, 11 is sustainable cities and communities, 12 is responsible consumption and production, 13 is climate action, 14 is life below water, 15 is life on land, 16 is peace, justice, and strong institutions, 17 is partnerships for the goals. Those are the sustainable development goals. They help us care for humanity and nature. If you remember them, the sustainable development goals, you can help the world become a better place for you and me.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Eliane Balijuro, the Global Hub Director of Future Earth in Canada and the Executive Director of Sustainability in the Digital Age. I'm also the moderator for today's bilingual event. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the community. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our partner and the founder and CEO of the Canadian Science Policy Centre, Dr. Mehrdad Harari. Mehrdad, please.
Thank you, Eliane. Bonjour, hello everyone. First, I would like to acknowledge the land from which I'm talking to you, the traditional land of Wenda, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe peoples, whose presence continue to this day. And I want to thank them and other Indigenous peoples for sharing this land with us. I want to extend a very warm welcome to you all and thank you for attending the first town hall of the National Dialogue Series called Canada's Sustainable Future, Creating a Digital Action Plan. This series of online dialogue is hosted jointly by the Future Earth, Sustainability in the Digital Age, and the Canadian Science Policy Centre. And we look at how digital innovations can help Canada achieve the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. The knowledge and key findings developed during this dialogue will be presented to a large science policy audience in November at the 13th Canadian Science Policy Conference, which will be on November 22nd to November 26th. And it is important to note that the Government of Canada has provided funding for this National Dialogue Series through their Sustainable Development Goals funding program. Their program, Moving Forward Together, Canada's 2030 Agenda National Strategy, is an important milestone in continuing to implement and advance the 2030 Agenda. It supports progress on the Sustainable Development Goals in Canada and abroad. Nous nous réjouissons de votre participation et j'espère que vous appréciez l'événement d'aujourd'hui. Et si vous avez des questions pour les panélistes aujourd'hui, veuillez le mettre dans la boîte de questions-réponses. Nous voulons savoir ce que vous pensez de ce sujet important. Merci pour votre participation. Thank you very much for your participation. Eliane, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mehrdad. And the topic for today's discussion is digital transformation to scale public awareness for sustainability. One of the aims of this virtual series is to identify both the challenges and opportunities presented when we engage with digital technologies for sustainability targets. With the knowledge we gather from these online dialogues, we can provide recommendations for policymakers, nonprofits, private sector, and science stakeholders to create together a sustainable future for everyone in Canada. Now, I would like to introduce the panelists for our discussion today. Bonnie Schmidt is the founder and president of Let's Talk Science. Ki Wang is the Director of Strategy, Policy and Planning at the Canada Council for the Arts. Jeff Wilson is the Executive Director of Brilliant Labs. John Colton is Professor and Head of Community Development at Acadia University. Ryan Oliver is Chief Executive Officer of Pinguac. And then we'll also have Rhoda Muse, the Secretary General of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, who will be joining us shortly. We also have with us Anthony Blanc and Philippe Vitu, our simultaneous interpreters who will serve today's French-speaking audience. Alicia Bramlett, who is a graphic facilitator with Depict, is also with us. She's based in Cleveland, Tennessee. Her role is to listen, harvest content, and represent the event with art and illustrations. She will also Miro board to capture the highlights of today's discussion and show us her work during the town hall. So now let's dive into our discussion. I would like to invite each panelist to give their initial thoughts about scaling public awareness in Canada for sustainability and how digital innovations could help in any way accelerate this process. You will each have 2 minutes. So let's start with Bonnie.
Great. Thanks, Eliane. And I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here. I'm calling in from my home in London, Ontario, which is covered by Treaty 6. 2 minutes isn't much time to anchor it. So I'll just start with a couple of things that I've been thinking about with this topic. One, it is so important for us to have hopeful, inclusive conversations. And I just applaud you for bringing us all together in this way. Let's Talk Science has actually come to the SDGs relatively recently, and over the last few years have been incorporating them more and more in our programming, along with a commitment to digital skills and literacy. So perhaps in the Q&A session, we can unpack a little bit more about that, what that looks like. But for today, I had a couple of ideas of perhaps we can expand on later, but the fact that we need to think about this as a starting point. And as we frame out recommendations, I really encourage everybody to be thinking about it in a multi-pronged way. So how do we think about individuals? How do we actually get to people at the grassroots level? How do we think about schools and communities and what kind of tactics and approaches are going to be needed? How at the systems level, those organizations that are thinking about regulatory or policy initiatives, do we bring them into the discussion? And then finally, where we often end up focusing is on a political, how do we deal with policies and so forth. I've personally been really fortunate and absolutely blessed to be involved in a few international initiatives in which the SDGs and digital literacy really began to become more prominent in the last 2 years. You can see how things are really catching on. The first one is I was a member of the Federal Committee Public Awareness of AI Working Group. That report will be out soon, and I think it will give us really good insight about how to gauge public interest, public awareness, and communication strategies to get people involved at a high level, at a systems level, and at an individual level in understanding issues around sustainability. So I'll urge everyone to stay tuned for when that report becomes released. I also was really fortunate to serve on the PISA Science 2024 experts panel just before COVID. And that panel was convened to reconceptualize the international science test that is done in over 80 countries around the world. They knew it was time for thinking about science education a bit differently, and it's often a bellwether. So climate, systems thinking, digital literacy, informatics, a whole new approach was being put forward by these experts for the OECD to integrate into schools. And that might actually start to really push curriculum reform around the world in a way that can help get some of the things that we bring forward today anchored. I was also the editor of a report for the Inter-American Network of Academies of Science, and that covers national academies of science in North America, Central America, and South America. And there was considerable conversation about how do we integrate nature and how do we actually think about digital and sustainable development goals there, as those scientists are thinking about how to reach out. And finally, the last area that we've started to work on at Let's Talk Science is a partnership with the Globe and Mail with the anchor of how do we get people to understand what the issues are, because frankly, the SDGs aren't all that well known by the general public. So what can we do as a collective? Everybody here is interested, engaged, and really thinking about these topics. How can we use partnerships and channels to go forward with that? Maybe I'll just stop there or I'll just keep on going.
Thank you, Bonnie. That was really helpful. What you're saying in terms of Canadians and people living in Canada's familiarity of the SDG goals is really important. During the federal debate, one of the things that came out in the climate portion was the idea that a quarter of Canadians weren't aware that climate change was, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, were caused by human action. So these kinds of events are really important to really help people understand how our role is critical in climate and how we can collectively work together in terms of bringing in the resilience we need. So back to our question in terms of the initial thoughts for scaling public awareness in Canada. I'd like to go to Ryan.
Thank you. And thanks for inviting me, and thanks for having me as a part of this. For the Pingwalk Association, we really, we really focus and have chosen with our staff to focus and choose sustainability as the key impact in everything we do. And I think, like, as we scale awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals and all that, it's important to remember kind of where the answers to a lot of these questions already are. And for us, what that means is understanding that, like, often the solutions to these issues are already in the community. Our approach in the programming we do in teaching digital skills is to build capacity within communities to utilize the tools in order to tell stories and in order to help become part of the solution. And so we really look at this within Pingwalk as kind of reversing the innovation flow. So for us, within our organization, for those that don't know, our focus is on building digital skills within rural, remote, and indigenous communities. And for us, when we talk about reversing the innovation flow, what we're talking about is as much as possible as kind of at the core of everything we do, understanding that sustainability is going to come not by us bringing solutions into rural, remote, and indigenous communities, but by listening and centering community within those solutions. And so we have a development plan that we've developed that puts community ownership and involvement at the center of what we do. And then with community at the center, partnerships become the foundation of our work. And when we talk about reversing the innovation flow, we're talking then about creating solutions that can address things like the Sustainable Development Goals and export them from rural, remote, and indigenous communities, because often that's where the answers are. And so our solutions really is at the end of the day to enable experiences, enable technology in order to hear what answers already exist within those communities.
Thank you very much, Ryan. And I just want to remind everybody, as Glenn Markham puts in the chat, climate is not the only SDGs, and it's important to remember that. And as we think about that, I would like to bring Rhoda Muse. Rhoda, who's the Secretary General of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. So Rhoda, in terms of the immense perspective that UNESCO brings, what are your initial thoughts about scaling public awareness in Canada for sustainability?
Bonjour tout le monde. Merci Eliane de me donner la parole. Hello everyone. I would first like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, whose presence here reaches back time immemorial. It's my great pleasure to have the opportunity to say a few words on this occasion. As an agency of the United Nations, UNESCO and its member states, which includes Canada, are tasked with raising awareness about the Sustainable Development Goals. The Canadian Commission for UNESCO acts as a true network of networks that facilitates cooperation and the mobilization of knowledge in UNESCO's 5 main areas of intervention: education, human and social sciences, natural sciences, culture, and communication and information. One of the biggest challenges when it comes to SDGs is in raising awareness. 2030 is the decade of action for the SDGs, but I think you will find that few people are aware of them. Yet, the majority are aware of the biggest challenges the world is facing today, such as biodiversity loss and the impacts of climate change, which the SDGs were designed to tackle. In addition, there is a lot of misinformation out there about global challenges, so we face a double challenge: raising awareness about the SDGs and tackling misinformation. A key part of our work as the Canadian Commission for UNESCO is to partner with organizations that promote the SDGs and boost their presence online through social media. One example is an organization called STEAM Fellowship that organizes a big data day each year on a theme related to the SDGs. This year's theme, for example, is related to SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. In this challenge, high school students will use publicly available data from all levels of government and community organizations to analyze how technical and social innovations could make a difference in access and affordability of clean energy at the personal, community, and regional levels. Another key area of our work is in promoting media and information literacy. This is important because it provides answers to the questions such as: how can we access, search, critically assess, use, and contribute content wisely, both online and offline? What are our rights online and offline? What are the ethical issues surrounding the access and use of information? How can we engage with media and ICTs to promote equality, intercultural and interreligious dialogue, peace, freedom of expression, and access to information? Finally, like Ryan did, promoting indigenous knowledge is a key priority for our commission. In November 2020, with the World Indigenous Nations Higher Education Consortium, we co-hosted the World Virtual Indigenous Circle on Open Science and the Decolonization of Knowledge, organized by the UNESCO Chair in Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education. The themes that emerged outline the role of the broader scientific community in addressing the climate crisis and in restoring equilibrium by supporting indigenous scientific communities. The central goal of indigenous knowledge is sustainability. Indigenous science is about love of land, and its continuity is therefore linked to the continuity of life on Earth. Yes, thank you, Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Rhoda. You talked about the importance of technical and social innovation and working together, and I think those are really key. I'm just going to go to you, Jeff. In terms of your experience with Brilliance Labs, what would you say has been really important in terms of scaling public awareness in Canada for sustainability?
First of all, thanks for having me, and I apologize in advance for the flickering. We had a high school student program an AI bot, so I could do many things at once, but apparently there's a glitch in the program. No, but seriously, I think like raising awareness is super important, but as one commenter in the chat mentioned, that messaging has to come with urgency and also a call to action. And I think when it comes to technology, we're needing to reach people where they are. So whether it be through social media or other technologies, like if Facebook can be used by troll farms and bots to kind of, share disinformation and good information, how can we leverage some of these tactics to raise awareness? But that awareness needs to come with that call to action. So with Brilliant Labs in Atlantic Canada, we work with young people and educators, and they are ready. They are willing to step up, they tackle these very complex problems, and we don't shy away from these conversations. So how do we leverage technology? Probably in many ways. One, to get the message out, to raise awareness, but also perhaps to start collecting information and data and kind of remote sensing and all a bunch of different ways to kind of paint the picture and try to kind of instill that sense of urgency in Canadians, because 2030 is a long way away. And we have a very large concern that might be too late. So how do we kind of craft that message, coming together, harnessing technology, all the platforms that are available to us, both traditional and non-traditional communication channels with technology, is super important.
Thank you very much, Jeff. This is the importance of literacy for collective action is really critical, and how we act on both sides is really important. Without enough literacy, the citizen engagement that is needed to ensure that how we move forward happens in the way that is needed is very critical. So we're going to turn to a perspective from the arts. In terms of the work that you're involved in, how would you see the need for scaling public awareness in Canada for sustainability?
Well, thank you, Ilian, and thanks to all of you for creating the time and holding the space for this dialogue and for us to be able to think together. So I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Ottawa on the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. And when I was thinking about this topic, kind of the nexus between arts, digital, and sustainable development goals, I kind of thought about it in a few different ways. First, that not only, do the arts entertain us and comfort us, but they really also bring us together. They create opportunities for us to reflect, raise awareness. We've mentioned that a number of times, but also hopefully incent action and changes in behaviors. And, to a large degree, artists have always been very much kind of at the forefront of raising awareness, whether it's about sustainability or other social issues. And to a large degree, we can think about kind of art can be about sustainability or climate, but also we've been thinking about how art in its practice could be made more sustainable, whether it's, using biodegradable materials or carbon offsets. And then, in terms of digital, thinking about kind of the way we use digital for art making, whether it's using like AI or virtual reality, putting kind of audiences, for example, in nature. And also, of course, accelerated during the pandemic times, this notion of digital dissemination. So streaming, websites, podcasting in a much more prevalent way over the last 18 months than ever before. I think also in terms of thinking about some of the challenges that kind of may present when we talk about kind of art. I mean, largely in traditional kind of art forms, it requires, you know, large facilities and travel. So particularly like performing arts, which may not be the most sustainable. So the use of kind of digital dissemination as a way to reduce and eliminate some of those carbon footprints, and to be able to allow us to reach a much broader audience, both in Canada as well as globally. So for arts to kind of become more accessible and potentially more sustainable. And as I was thinking about these issues too, I kind of wanted to maybe put out there a few kind of challenges for us to think about. So both in terms of, you know, kind of the balance we may want to strike between digital experiences and the in-person experience. You know, art in particular is very emotional, and the way we interact with art, whether that is different, you know, how that is different in the in-person context versus the digital. And we may all have kind of lived experiences over the last 18 months during the pandemic, and when we haven't been able to interact with art in the in-person way as much as we used to. And also, just as we think about kind of digital and technology, just be cautious about kind of not perpetuating maybe some of the inequities. You know, we're talking about algorithms and how those might be built on kind of existing processes, systems, assumptions. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you very much, Katie. This is really important in terms of the idea also of starting with a song today was really in terms of emphasizing the importance of how do we get art to meet science, and how do we work collectively to bring both sides of our brains to work together and accelerate action towards 2030. So John, as a professor and as also head of community development at Acadia University, what are your thoughts just in terms of starting up this conversation related to awareness?
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to participate. And I also wanted to acknowledge that I'm speaking from Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people out in Atlantic Canada. But it's quite a range of ideas, you know, from, you know, Bonnie sharing sort of policy and strategic approaches, and then Ryan talking about, you know, the work that he's doing with the organization and with the communities. And I think for me, when I think what's really critical in all this is when I often think about the affective and the cognitive dimensions. So we can teach people, and we can use apps, you know, to teach. So that's one of the things that came up. But how do we connect people sort of emotionally? So how do we kind of connect both the hands and the heart? And I think that's really critical, like, you know, to, you know, this idea of reconnecting people with nature. So I'm going back to some of the promotional, the materials that were provided at the beginning, saying that that's a really key piece, is that people need to care. And how do we make them care? So we make them care by providing knowledge, but then we make them care by providing experiences and stories. So I think Ryan mentioned, you know, stories were used, and stories are a gift, right? They're a gift that everyone has, and, you know, and it centers you, you know, in a particular place. I'm thinking of just, you know, a few examples. Just here in Nova Scotia, we have something called Earth Adventures, where where you can put it on your phone, and it's a digital trail that you can do with your families, where you can move around the province. And in each trail, there's spots along the way that you have to discover with knowledge. That's been really popular. You know, a really great way of bringing together different generations, you know, young people and parents, because it's meant to bring people together. But also a way of connecting with nature, with information, but also firsthand experiences. If you can't get a firsthand experience, then sometimes stories are super powerful. There's an organization that I follow called the Arctic Eider Society. And, you know, they developed a film called People of the Feather that talked about the relationship, you know, in the cultural challenges in the community, relationship with the eider, and the impacts of hydroelectric development in Quebec in terms of, you know, the sea ice. And that film and that organization and the communities involved has spawned another incredible innovation called CQ, which is a learning platform, that's based on Indigenous knowledge. Teachers can go on that, in Arctic communities or in Nova Scotia, and develop lesson plans, look at films on narwhal or ocean biodiversity. So, and what's interesting about those examples is that they follow storylines, and they connect people personally to one another, and they use digital media innovation to do that. And so I think there's room for lots of innovation, but I think there's some really good examples that could be built on and supported by more policy and strategic thinking. So thanks.
Thank you. I also appreciate the exchanges in the chat. So I encourage people to share, continue sharing. There's a note that Helen Hambley shared around Amanda Hutter's work on participatory action research. And it's really important in terms of that idea of we need awareness and action. So thank you. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their answering the general questions. So now I'm going to have specific questions for each panelist, and we'll start with you, Bonnie, again. So how is Let's Talk Science using digital technologies to engage youth and educators with the Sustainable Development Goals?
Great. Thanks, Eliane. I have to say, I just applaud all of the great comments. I just want to dig into everything that everybody said, but specifically with what Let's Talk Science is doing. We are a national organization that uses STEM, very broadly defined. It does include a lot with the arts as well. We partner extensively, so we can take a community-based approach with all of our programming. So we work with 52 universities and colleges, mobilize thousands of volunteers across the country. We help them deploy at the local level digital programming for young people. We do a lot of training of teachers across the country and have very specified digital programming as well. We have CAN Code funding, and that's really exclusive around digital. We've tried to bring the Sustainable Development Goals together with our digital programming so that teachers are learning about digital skills in the context of something bigger. And so we've integrated Sustainable Development Goals explicitly into the teacher professional learning and into the youth development opportunities. So we literally have thousands of programs that are being delivered across the country in thousands of communities as we go, feeding into the idea that kids need relevance, and the ability to strike the emotional connection is actually so important that I hope we can dig into it later. And we've created what we call action projects, which allow young people to do these like citizen science type activities. We've just released one looking at the impact of the clothing industry and fast fashion on climate. And it's called Clothing for Climate. And it covers many of the Sustainable Development Goals, but anchors on that. And we've got a few others that are like it. So the idea that we can empower young people to use digital skills, learn about the goals in whichever context, and bring back actions and evidence that will inform them. We've really started to focus more on how do we help young people gather evidence and use evidence in their own personal decision-making. And through these action projects, we're finding that they are feeling quite empowered. And in fact, we're just conceptualizing a large teen research project looking at what do kids think about climate action and climate change in particular? So we can talk a bit about that later. And I'd love to say too that Let's Talk Science is a proud partner with STEM Fellowship on Big Data Challenge. So the idea of more and more opportunities to bring the context of the larger SDGs to bear is really great in education from the perspective that it anchors relevance and importance and a context for young people that often can be missed if they're only thinking about subject areas. So the SDGs are providing a powerful platform in and of themselves. Of course, they're important, but they hit at the core of education and the need to provide some context. And I guess the last thing I'd say that we've really moved towards is having online symposia. COVID really taught us what we can do using digital technologies. And we partner with the Royal Society, the Space Agency, Genome Canada, and others to offer larger scale symposiums where high school students can connect with experts and have access to the people to ask their questions to directly. And that's become quite powerful in helping them think about what action they should be taking and how to think about the greater environment and where the SDGs can fit.
So thank you, Bonnie. And you mentioned how COVID has really created this reset. When this project was initially thought, well, we had intended to have 3 events, one in Eastern Canada, one in Central Canada, and one in Western Canada in physical mode. And so switching to COVID really required us, how do we operate? And the idea for us was really having 3 events, this first one on awareness, the second one on partnerships, and the third one on Indigenous science and wisdom, and really get participation from across Canada with minimizing our carbon footprint. And so COVID has created an awareness of how technology can also help us connect. And it's really, how do we use technology for good? There was a comment on youth are connected and they're technological savvy. And what's important is in a world where what we know is that 7 to 9 times more misinformation on the web than authentic information. It's not about only being technologically savvy. It's about how do we use technology for good? And how do we align that with the actions we need to urgently bring forward in the next 9 years? So Jeff, I'd like to come to you. How does Brilliant Labs support transforming education and communities through sustainable growth with digital skills and competencies?
Yeah, so like from day one, which is 7.5 years ago, we were always here to help inspire creativity, innovation, and a socially responsible and sustainable entrepreneurial spirit. And so as the SDGs gain momentum in the last 4 years, it's been a lot more intentional in using that language, especially in the last 3 years, in trying to raise awareness with teachers, because like I mentioned earlier, the students are ready to go. So throughout all of our programming, I think it was Bonnie that referenced like action projects. So like we've supported about 3,500 projects in Atlantic Canada over the last many years. They're all these types of like learning by doing with this real world kind of solution, kind of problem solving aspect. And we touch a range of about 150 different digital skills, from 3D design and printing and conception, engineering, robotics, microcontrollers, multimedia, a lot of the platforms that were mentioned earlier. We've gotten into biomaking lately, which is really awesome because it allows students to get hands-on. I think she referenced also, Bonnie, fast fashion. So we have these ethical conversations before they get hands-on with some of these new technologies and innovations about the ethical treatment of animals and workers around the world for these kind of consumer-based fashion things. And then they get hands-on and grow their own bio leather, which is both sustainable and kind of easy to make. And the students are always blown away and come out with a million ideas of what they could do with this new innovation. And so biomaking is one of the main things that we're looking at promoting in more schools. Bioconductive plastics. So we've developed our own open source prototyping platform that uses microcontrollers, but then all the e-waste that, tons, like trillions of tons of e-waste around the world. So how can we make bioconductive materials that are also compostable and biodegradable? So getting young people hands-on with these new innovations. We've had guest speakers address like thousands of our students and teachers. One of them included a lady, Tasca Taran from BC, who was using a sensor array and microcontrollers to biosonificate the mycelium, which is like the fungi roots of like of mushrooms in land. So now you're almost like personifying and giving life and sound to these networks of mycelium. And so all these startups, again, with mycelium, for example, they're creating everything from furniture to a bunch of other items using kind of biodegradable, more sustainable ways of growing our products rather than just pillaging resources from the planet and making products that are then disposable. We also have a very large Community of the Future challenge. So we challenge young people around the Atlantic region to think sustainably and look at everything from energy, transportation to policies, green spaces, all those types of things. And some of the wonderful ideas that even a grade 2 and 3 class would come up with, you know, you kind of think like, why didn't we think of this as adults? But then my comment earlier about like getting ready for action and that call to action, we like all this innovation is happening in our schools, and we have to be able to be prepared to help those young people turn those ideas from concepts into reality. When it comes to other SDG things that we've tried in the past and still do today, we've got a bunch of after school programs that we do in person and often virtually, summer camps, and always with this idea of awareness, but then problem solving towards it. We also have SDG prompts that are available for teachers. We do a lot of professional learning around SDG stuff for teachers. We've got some lesson plans that are there available for teachers to use. And those prompts, for example, can be used as conversational prompts with students or writing prompts. We also had a high school student 2.5 years ago develop a series of 40 SDG books for K-3 that we use successfully in our summer camps for read aloud, think aloud with young people to raise awareness, and then teaching the digital skills afterwards so that they can feel empowered to try to solve some of these problems. So yeah, I could probably name a dozen other things, but I don't want to take too much time. So yeah, definitely it's front and center in all of our minds. We work with our teacher training programs, our teachers, our students, and our education systems to raise awareness, but also put the tools and the supports and the training in their hands so that they can, you know, feel empowered to do something about it today, not like after they graduate high school or get to university or get to the workforce. Like, how do we help grade 10 students make a difference now?
I love this idea of youth engagement and action, and also encouraging visions of entrepreneurship across genders in terms of the examples you were sharing. And this is really important as we move forward in terms of how do we ensure nobody's left behind. So I really appreciate your contribution, Jeff. So Key, what do you see as the role of the Canada Council for the Arts in digital innovation to scale public awareness for sustainability?
Yes, so, well, the Canada Council for the Arts is Canada's public arts funder. So we have a mandate for promoting the creation, dissemination, the enjoyment of arts and literature. And so, you know, many of the instruments we have relate to funding, whether it be through grants or prizes, but also in terms of like partnerships. And what we hope also is to model and to behave in the way that we are promoting, especially in our new strategic plan, which is for this year, for the next 5 years. And many of the commitments we have in the strategic plan very much joins up with the strategic or the SDGs. And you know, we're really very much thinking about how to support the arts sector as it rebuilds coming out of the pandemic in a more equitable, more inclusive, sustainable, resilient, innovative manner. So in fact, the timing of this conversation is really great because the council has just actually launched 2 digital initiatives. One is called the Digital Generator. So it supports and builds digital capacity in artists, arts organizations, arts groups. And the other one is called the Digital Greenhouse. And I can pop links to our website for these 2 initiatives in the chat function shortly. But this Digital Greenhouse is all about digital, you know, for artists, for arts groups and organizations to be able to have advanced projects that leverage digital technology or explore digital solutions related to climate responsibility, equity, diversity, decolonization. So that's really exciting. And I think the other piece I'd like to highlight in terms of our strategic plan is very much the emphasis around collaboration and partnerships. So we recognize that many of the challenges we are wanting to address in our ambitious strategic plan is very much you know, multifaceted. They're interconnected. These are complex social and policy issues, one that we cannot get at whether we're the Canada Council on our own or the arts sector on our own. So it's really about reaching out, linking up with other sectors, with other other like-minded organizations, be it in science, health, education, so in many other fields and sectors, so we can tackle these challenges together.
Thank you very much, Aki. So Rhoda, what is the role that you see of multilateral organizations like UNESCO in digital innovation to scale public awareness for sustainability?
Thank you, Eliane. As a specialized agency of the UN system, UNESCO plays an important role in setting standards and norms on a variety of priorities, especially those relating to the protection and promotion of all forms of rights, culture, and heritage. And recommendations are mostly used. These are instruments that are intended to influence the development of national laws and practices. First of all, there are concerns that the advent of new technologies could lead to counterproductive impacts on society, setting back rather than moving forward progress towards the SDGs. For example, technology is often available only to the wealthy and could further exclude the most vulnerable in society. With the SDG pledge to leave no one behind, there is a considerable risk that this is exactly what will happen, with society becoming increasingly dependent on digital technology and its data being used for decision-making, for example. If we look at Canada, we are not either immune to the digital divide, especially between urban and rural and remote communities. The other point is that artificial intelligence, for example, is a technology that can be a powerful tool to help advance or achieve the sustainable development goals. For example, it can address climate change and environmental issues. By gathering and analyzing data, AI-powered models could, for example, help to improve ecosystem management and habitat restoration, essential to diminish the decline of fish and wildlife populations. However, data extractions consume nearly 10% of energy globally. So it's also essential to address the high energy consumption of AI and the consequential impact on carbon emission. The UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI, artificial intelligence, aims to provide a basis to make AI systems work for the good of humanity, individuals, societies, and the environment and ecosystems, and to prevent harm. It also aims at stimulating the peaceful use of AI systems. Another key role that I see is in promoting science as a human right, in particular in open science. Just as challenges such as climate change are global threats, the science related to combating them should be seen as a global common. It should be freely available. UNESCO has also drafted a recommendation on open science to ensure that progress can be made towards the SDGs through scientific cooperation. So always cooperation, collaboration, participation. Open science is not just about to access scientific literature and publication, it's also access to data, analytical code, and the ability to participate in the scientific process. These require the infrastructure for storing data and the digital literacy to be able to access it. Going back to the example I gave before about the big data challenge, that sort of activity would not be possible if data wasn't available and freely accessible. There, we have young minds using big data to solve some of the world's biggest challenges. Finally, by raising awareness of UNESCO standard setting instruments like the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence and the recommendation on open science, UNESCO is ensuring that sustainability is in the digital age can advance more rapidly and is equitable for all. So that's the role of multilateral organizations.
Thank you very much, Rhoda. The importance of leaving no one behind and the work that's needed to do habitat restorations. We often forget about oceans, about water streams. So John, I'd like to, if you could share with us, what is the blue economy and why should it matter to all people living in Canada?
Okay, thank you. Boy, it's hard to not take time to focus on what I've just heard, and Rhoda, you know, everyone's made such good points, but this digital divide and access is certainly a global issue. But even in Nova Scotia, we're still largely a rural population. You know, with the pandemic, it's been a challenge for many students to access education and telehealth, and so yeah, it's an issue. And literally, my own home just got hooked up to high speed last week, and I live, you know, 15 minutes from a you know, a small urbanish center or university center. But you know, Canada's been part of the blue economy for a long time. It's a part of our history, our economic system, part of our heritage. It's more recently, in the last 15 or so or 20 years, when we're thinking about the blue economy in sort of a different language and more around thinking about how do we protect our oceans, how do we sustain them, you know, in order to protect ecosystem services and provide livelihoods and jobs. But you know, when we've done, you know, historically a fairly catastrophic job, you know, sometimes managing, you know, that commons, whether it's you know, the collapse of the cod fishery or how we manage oil and gas transportation. And you know, but I do want to, you know, recognize that, you know, the blue economy in one way or another has been a large part of our identity. I mean, we have one of the largest coastlines in the world, and you know, the 4th largest ocean territory. When we're thinking about the blue economy now, obviously, you know, fisheries is a big part of it, energy, and that's where I tend to put a lot of my effort, and I'll speak more to that in just a moment. You know, aquaculture, increasingly deep seabed mining is something that's becoming part of that blue economy, and how do you manage that in a way that doesn't, you know, endanger the ecosystem. Aquaculture, which it's a great opportunity, but it prevents significant challenges as well in terms of interactions between wild or farm salmon, for example. You know, but there's been a lot of effort, you know, so for some regions, for example, Nova Scotia, we've got the Bay of Fundy, the highest tidal range of anywhere in the world, gives us incredible opportunities to develop marine-based energy. We've used tools like strategic environmental assessments based on the precautionary principle to help us manage our incremental growth. And so as we're exploring energy in the Bay of Fundy, it's also happening at an incremental pace where we can understand the impacts of these turbines in the water. And it's, when we think about the opportunities of the blue economy, and Australia has ramped up a massive plan, the European Union, the UK, Canada has a roadmap for the blue economy. It would be great if you could somehow embed that in the blue economy as well. And I think, Glenn, that's what they're doing with this new concept of the blue economy, is they want to embed an ecological approach. So we have to be careful with those opportunities. So for example, in our efforts to develop offshore wind, especially in the European context and the UK context, there's been great innovation, you know, the ability to put them farther offshore. But they've also found that there's a moratorium because people are getting tired of looking at a horizon full of offshore wind turbines. So how do we measure these technical, you know, these technical innovations and changes, also kind of with aesthetics as well, and also with you know, with having understanding of the intrinsic qualities of the ecosystem. And so you know, blue economy is, you know, has this great potential. There's some niche, but fairly good niche opportunities that are emerging. So for example, in Nova Scotia, we have harvesting of seaweed. In BC, there's a feasibility study that explored that, and they noted that there's upwards of 30,000 jobs potentially available in the seaweed harvesting industry. And so, the blue economy offers, incredible potential at Acadia. And I was thinking about some of the thoughts that Jeff was sharing. We've used sort of 3D printers and designs to develop tidal turbine designs, where we would then take into school programs where students can hands-on try different designs of turbine blades to see which one provides the most efficient energy. And so there's, it offers tremendous potential for Canada, recognizing that it's been a big part of our life and our society and our economy. But we also really need to approach it cautiously and really frame it within an ecosystem and ecological approach. And my fear is that we're not doing that, we're not adhering to that approach as well as we should be. And that's one of my chief concerns. Thanks.
Thank you, John. The notion of blue economy versus blue ecology was shared in the chat, and I think there's so much to be explored. And the other element that I think is important that many people don't realize is right now in the world, in terms of climate incidents, flooding is the one that is causing the most damage in the world, and Canada has a fourth of the wetlands of the whole planet, and conserving these areas is so critical to our resilience moving forward. And so there's so much that can be explored as we move forward. And so I'm going to ask a question to Ryan, and right after I will have Alicia show us what she's worked on so far in terms of representing our discussion graphically. So Ryan, what does STEAM mean to you in terms of STEAM, and why is STEM not enough? How is Bingwak harnessing STEAM to promote thriving and empowered Indigenous and other communities?
Thank you. Yeah, so for us, the A in STEAM, which is arts, just immediately makes the rest of that word more accessible. The arts make it something that is now open to more than just the scientists, more than just the mathematicians. It changes it from kind of a wall of code that needs to be figured out when you're talking about digital skills, or this kind of foreign box in front of you that seems to have a mind of its own, into something that you can create with. And so we apply it into everything we do. I would say, like, probably it's a huge tenet of what we do. And probably, like, on average, when we're running a session, 50% of it is arts focused, but digital arts, and with a focus on how we can help kind of use it as a gateway into the rest of that. And so, like science, technology, engineering, math, the STEM portion of that is very attractive to a select group of people. There is a certain type of brain that loves those four words. But by adding arts into what we do, and whether we're teaching adults or youth, it makes it that much more approachable for people. It makes it less scary. Because it is, like, all of these things by themselves, science can be an art, engineering definitely can be an art, math is an art in its own self, but technology is kind of, it needs art, and technologies, it needs art to make sense of it, and it needs art in order to make it something that is more than just a consumption device, that can be something that you create with. And so, it makes the interactions in technology more human and more real, and it can be used then as a mode of expression. So for us, what that looks like as an organization is we are, with the Sustainable Development Goals in the back of mind as we move forward, trying to build digital skills in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. We've had this experience millions of times, and we sometimes run programming specific on it. But some quick examples are, whenever we run a session, let's say with youth, if I'm doing a game design session, I'm teaching kids, like, here's how to develop a game, to build those skills in order to allow, through media, the ability to express and tell your own stories. We do sessions on programming, but we also do sessions on digital art. We do sessions on music. We do sessions on even project management. And at the end of that week, come together and have everyone kind of pick the area that they were the most interested by, and build a game together within a day in a game jam. And so you have some kids that, like I said, are immediately attracted to the engineering and the math piece, and they are the coders. But it is just as accessible and just as welcoming then to the kids that want to focus on the art and bring the style to it and make it that much more accessible. so some programs we are running right now, there's with adults, we are running a program where we are working with artists in Nunavut to build digital skills for those artists in order to help share that expression worldwide and provide a digital presence. At the same time, we worked with Nakai Theater in the Yukon to build digital skills for performing artists there. Again, with that same idea that as soon as you have control of this technology, you can turn it to your own use. You can make it tell the story you want to tell. In Curve Lake First Nation and just outside of Peterborough in Ontario right now, we just finished a session with youth, having them tell their stories through digital art, build digital art skills within that community of youth, which led then to some kids being less intimidated by the coding elements, opening more doors because we got them in that first door. It was an opportunity then to tell cultural stories, tell stories from that community that otherwise, at least digitally wouldn't have been told, and that then as a result have that much more of an audience. We regularly run workshops out of our makerspaces on digital art skills, and those lead to opportunities for youth in communities and for adults and for young adults in particular, where we are an organization that makes apps and makes games, makes websites for people that need them, but we do it with an education component with the youth we've been developing with this whole time. And so recently we ran a whole series of digital art programs across our various makerspaces, and then Kids Help Phone came to us and said, we want to figure out how to make a new messaging system, like a new series of ads, really was what it was, to provide the message on how to reach out to Kids Help Phone. And we had our youth come together, use those digital art skills that they had built, that we had kind of like broken down that barrier. Kids that maybe never would have gone into a spot called a makerspace or never gone into something called the technology center before, because they're artists, but we were able to get them involved, get them paid, and get them involved in this opportunity. So when I look at the sustainable development goals, for me, it's kind of back to what I was saying before. Like we have to figure out where these solutions already are and make it as open and welcoming to everyone as possible. And I think art really adds that one last piece when we're talking about digital technology, because when you can interact with technology through art and interact with art through technology, it's that much more accessible for a segment of the population that may otherwise be ignored.
Thank you, Ryan. There's been lots of activity just based from everything you're sharing, and this idea that going from STEM to STEAM brings us to team, in terms of this idea that how do we have more collaborative distributed leadership in the world. And one of the things that I love around what you're saying is it's how do you de-risk it so all people, all children feel that they can be involved, and the importance of making it not an exclusive ivory tower space, but really a space to engage everyone and have inclusive innovation to happen. And so as we think about moving towards STEAM, I'd like to now invite the audience to submit questions to the panelists that we'll look at. And so please type your questions in the Q&A box. I would also like to give you a few minutes for this. And in the meantime, we would like to look at the graphic artist Alicia's work in progress. So I just wanted to give everybody a moment to be able to appreciate Alicia's art and think back to the richness of how do we take discussions and make them visual, and the importance of realizing that there's so many forms of intelligence that can be tapped into, and the importance of trying in any way possible to tap into these different forms of intelligence to make literacy stronger. And also at the same time, engage all of our senses so that we engage. I love the idea of mind, heart, and hands. How do we really connect those different parts in us to have collective action and scale collective action, given the urgencies of the 9 years we have in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So I see that there are questions entering the Q&A. And so I'm just going to look at the first question that has, so there was one initial question that had been put in terms of sustainability is a big word. What is your working definition to use to help those who are less clear? And I entered a definition around this, but I just wanted to know, Rhoda, would you in terms of how you see sustainability and sustainable development, would you like to add anything to this?
For the UNESCO, it's there is no disconnection between the different side of the sustainability. It touches so many areas. It's when you look at the for example, it's a matter. What I found, it's a matter of social justice. It covers so many different areas. It touched the equity, the women, the access to services, to the access to the education, the, how do I say, peace. So there is so many areas. It covers all aspects of our lives, what we enjoy. For example, in North America, we take everything like it's normal, but it's not normal. There is a, for example, we on Monday, we had the votes, the democracy, people were able to vote in peace without no problem. And we take that like it is a normal thing. It's not a normal thing. For others, it's not, just for some countries, it's not easy to vote openly. It's not easy to do it in peace. So when we look at, I don't know if you can, if when you are looking at the sustainability, it's how we make our lives secure, our lives, our environment clean, our education accessible, our food secure. So there are so many pieces. It's like a puzzle. So that's how we can transmit that. It's I don't know if that picture, if you have seen that picture put forward by the UN with so many colors. I think this is, I don't know if I can, I will put it on the chat. When you look at it with its symbols, its colors, this is the best way to show it. It's a whole, and it's colorful. It covers so many aspects of our lives, things that we think are normal, things that other aspects that other people don't find easy to access. So for me, the way that the United Nations put it in color, like what we've seen earlier, the picture that was in progress, this is the best way to do it. You know, people like to see something that is visual. You stick on it. And I will put that picture in the chat. So and there are so many, how do I say, I become emotional when I think about sustainability. It's how do I say, it's a God-given thing. It's so amazing. And the best people who can talk about sustainability are indigenous peoples, because it's part of their life. It's the language, the culture, the heritage. So many things are linked. And I think if I could make a recommendation, is to listen to them, to learn from them, and to adopt their definition of the sustainability.
Thank you, Rhoda. you're actually, thank you very much, Rhoda. You're taking us to the next question that Bryant shared. And so I have a wonderful team that is looking at the chat and the Q&A and transferring questions from the chat directly from me to be able to share. And so Bryant had a question on, do you have any insights on how to build capacity among youth to get educated on Indigenous issues? And so Ryan, I thought I'd ask you to respond to this one.
Yeah, interesting. I think when it comes to youth, you have to engage them where they are, and so like this would not be a great format to engage youth on Indigenous issues, and I need to make it matter to them. And so, I mean, I think an interesting, I don't think anyone has a great way to do this. Like, it's going to be different for every youth. It's going to be different for every, everyone's different background, everyone's different learning style. And so I guess I would start with, it needs to start in the schools. And I speak often with my peers about how mind-blowing it is that we went through school, in the very recent past and learned nothing about residential schools, honestly, I don't think we ever even spoke about Indigenous issues in school at any point. And I know that's changing now as my own kids go through school, but that's where it needs to start. Beyond that, though, it's a matter of engaging with youth in a way that is not corny and is where youth are. And so I think often what that means is finding champions in order to bring your message forward and to move that stuff forward. And so a really interesting example of this is what Fortnite has tried in the last month, where they've recreated the Washington Monument and attempted some engagement around Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech and building that into Fortnite. And the jury is still out on if that will be effective at all. But what it does accomplish is that youth are in Fortnite. That is where youth are. That is where conversations are happening. During the pandemic, it was the way my son stayed connected with most of his friends. And so as we look to what, how to engage youth in that, I think it requires us as adults and as media consumers to demand more of our politicians, of our media, and the media that our kids are consuming as well, so that that Indigenous issues, as an example, can be engaged in a way that's genuine and that's representative, and not exploitive. And so it's a different balance constantly. But I guess if I was to sum it up in a quick couple of bullet points, it'd be, it needs to start in schools. Find youth champions that think, that are engaged in the same way and really support the youth in pushing their message out. 100 times out of 100, youth are going to listen to youth before they listen to us. And so ensuring we empower and enable that conversation is really important.
Thank you, Ryan. So engaging youth is so important. And so Key, I have a question for you from Stephanie Baker. And so Stephanie asks, how can we make better use of our public institutions such as science museums through a national digital strategy? And can we go beyond the digital collections and work toward digital engagement? And I think that speaks to a little bit what Ryan was sharing.
Well, I think that is very much how we should be thinking about how we use digital, as we say, not just to kind of disseminate and have access to collections, be it science or arts, but actually how to use that as a medium to engage. And as Brian, I think very much pointed out, we need to engage where the people are. So it's not as a matter of, how can we be human-centered? How can we be user-centered? It's not about how we would like to get our messages out or how we would like to engage with the people that we'd like to speak to or hear from or learn from or co-create with, but rather where are they and how do we meet them where they need to be met, and then how do we create kind of the invitation, the space, the opportunity for us to actually have genuine dialogue, for us to listen, to understand deeply, and as I said, to welcome ideas, and how do we build on those ideas and solutions together, and then to hopefully implement and deliver all those solutions together as well. So, I mean, this is also my aspiration. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Keith. So Bonnie, I have a question from you from Carolis Raid. And Carolis, I had the opportunity of interviewing Carolis for a video that is available on the Sustainability in the Digital Age website for the work he's doing with Waste Not, Want Not. And so I encourage anybody who wants to see youth engagement in action in terms of reducing waste in Canada to watch Carolis's video. So Bonnie, the question to you is, speaking of education and raising awareness, how do you assess sustainability content in university curriculum in Canada?
I'm not sure I'm the best one to actually look at the curriculum and actually judging that. We tend to work at the early childhood to grade 12 level, so you can probably talk a bit more about that. Our work at the post-secondary level is finding ways to engage undergraduate, graduate students, PIs, staff, anybody who would be connected with the university across many different disciplines, and help them understand how can they take their work and then go out and work with schools and community settings. But what I will say across the broad spectrum is education is so challenging to scale. And I did see a couple of comments kind of fly up there, that there are some fantastic examples across the entire learning continuum of where sustainability principles are well embedded. There's great courses out there. There's some really interesting things, for example, happening in Saskatchewan. There's some amazing things happening in various post-secondary education pieces. But we tend to function in a society in which it becomes the purview of the classroom educator at whatever grade level to actually decide how much, and what level of youth engagement can actually happen. At the K-12 level, there's not that much in the curriculum right now when it comes to sustainability. And in fact, one of the reasons we've been doubling down on helping educators understand it is that there is just such a dearth of knowledge, not just on what they are, but how important they are for bringing relevance to learning in and of itself, which is so critically important. So some of my comments earlier around, like, we're doing lots of programming at the grassroots level, and 30 years in, so I've been doing this for a long time, and start to see cycles coming back. And I think part of the reason why we don't necessarily see the shift in education at whatever level we want is because in Canada, we have 27 separate ministries that are responsible for early learning to post-secondary education in the country. We have a complicated system that requires provocative change to have a system change, as opposed to individual nodes of excellence. And until we really start to understand how individuals are inspired to take action, how communities and systems are inspired to change, and how regulatory bodies globally, nationally, internationally can kind of be provoked to work together, it will be really difficult to meet these targets. And then the other thing, since I've got the mic on right now, is we often do start talking about certain SDGs because I think some of them are easier to understand and they're easier to measure, but they're not necessarily the only ones that we should be talking about. And so how do we get people to look holistically about sustainability in general, really begin to understand at a fairly straightforward level what it means, and get a little bit out of the headset of we have to be able to measure a very specific performance item in order to keep talking about it. And so I find that even at the education level, we might be starting to see a little bit more about specific areas integrated into the curriculum because it's just easier to understand and kind of easier to figure out if somebody's learned it. And we might need to think about different ways of communicating, inspiring action, understanding how systems work in association with individuals as well. Can't do one, got to do it all.
Thank you. I was wondering, John, if you had a perspective in terms of in your role as a professor and community outreach around this issue of education and raising awareness and assessing sustainability content in university curriculum in Canada.
Yeah, I saw the question and I posted that, and we're a pretty active group. We're a very small, I always say we're a small but mighty community development program, environmental studies program, and really our niche is sort of applying it. So many of the things, for example, I think that Bonnie mentioned, fast fashion. I mean, most of the things that have been discussed, we've had applied projects, in the community within the student population, for years, and have made it, an impact across the university community, but also in the wider region. But in terms of sustainability content, what are the ways that we keep active? And I'm also aware that lots of organizations do this, and that is, we spend considerable time, every year, not as head of the program, it's something that I do, on a regular basis, and that is seeing what other programs are doing. All of us, tend to stay pretty active in terms of what new knowledge is being developed and shared. I'm always particularly interested in student engagement and youth engagement and the connections between student groups beyond our university. So we have a fairly active SDG group here. In fact, my honor student is very involved in that organization, but she's been connecting with other SDG groups across Canada, and they've been developing online activities and doing their own professional development, and also bringing pressure, to bear on campuses and in programs like ours, to also, make sure that, our content is up to date, because, I can say that, it's probably not always up to date, but it's, when you think about the broader discussion that we're having with respect to digital innovation and access, I always think about power too, and that when you have access to that information, it also provides, a sense of power, and how can you use that, and how can you open space that's normally closed to other groups, and digital innovation can really do that. And so, with respect to content, we have students who check in with us and say, we'd like to explore ecological grief, for example, right? Because this is a concept that's emerging, yet we're not really talking about that. And, so we wrapped our heads around that. Other programs like ours, we're part of a broader network of institutions. There's an international group called ASHI that does a lot of networking. That's for folks that are involved in higher education that teach for sustainability. So by engaging in, national, international organizations, having our students engage with us, keeping up on current readings, and also just being proactive. And I'm really fortunate to work with very active colleagues, and ones who care a lot. In fact, 3 of us are giving a talk tomorrow on cultivating compassionate communities and interdependence, going to how do we help create empathy. And so I think I probably talked around the question, Ileana, and I hope I helped address it in part. Thanks.
Part of it is it's really how do we come together and explore hard issues together. And so, Jeff, I'd like to go to you. I have 2 questions here that I'd like you to consider, and Ryan, maybe you can also chime in. So one of them, looking at open sources, can open sourcing tools be one way to share technologies and methodologies? And the other one is, what does digital do that analog cannot, and why does that matter to the SDGs?
Right, I tried answering that one in chat. I wasn't sure if he was talking about the flow of data that comes from analog or digital. If that's the case, and obviously when it comes to digital, it gets chunked up in little bits of ones and zeros. So it's a lot easier to run metrics and analysis and run through, training models for machine learning purposes. Whereas analog is just a continuous flow and harder to break down into smaller bytes and figure out what's going on. But then I also didn't know if he was maybe referencing just microchips and digital things in general, creating tons of e-waste, when the old analog stuff might require less resistors and all those types of things. So I don't know. When it comes to, it is where we are, I think, as a society. I don't see us going back to analog anytime soon. So I think we just need to be forced to live with the current circumstances and know that we can maybe evolve it and make it less harmful. In terms of how we produce even printed circuit boards, for example, right? A lot of that uses toxic chemicals, and it's not a healthy environment to be working in. and the consequences for our planet afterwards is not great. The open source stuff, and Ryan can kind of jump in as he wishes, but like we've developed some open source technologies ourselves, including I referenced the prototyping platform, and also an open source cloud system. To make technology accessible to as many people as possible, it should be open source. Otherwise, the pricing of licenses and all these other types of cost of entry to having access to these technologies becomes very prohibitive for many, many people. Or sometimes, it's free for a year and all of a sudden, boom, you're paying $100 a month, and who can do that? It's not sustainable. So open source for us has been key for many, many years. We employ it ourselves, we develop it ourselves, and we use it extensively and almost exclusively for when we work with education.
Yeah, just add to that. I don't have much more to add there, but same philosophy for us, especially like we're working in communities that often have really poor internet access. And so we're negotiating that as well. And so the advantage of something that's open source and built like that is that you don't need to update it every week so if you tie someone into an Adobe subscription, for example, Creative Cloud updates weekly, and they're often massive gigabyte updates. With Unity, it's the exact same thing. And so for us, open source is really important. And the only other thing I'd add to that, for all the reasons Jeff said, but also because it fosters community and technology. Ultimately, I think the way that capitalism is going to require us to exist with technology is individual purchases that belong to the individual that and are often just rented for that individual or leased for that individual through a subscription, and then it belongs back to the company. And what open source does is it puts kind of technology where it was when I was a kid and when the internet was first starting, which is just like this is community and we're all building it together. And I think that just even on the sustainability goals there, like that's just a mentality that's going to be required if as we move forward. It's a healthy mentality to have. Like if we work together on whether it is developing the newest version of LibreOffice or figuring out a solution for plastic waste, then those are all going to be positive things. Yeah.
Jeff, would you like to add anything around this idea of analog and digital philosophy thinking? I was thinking, and I'm curious, this is the first time I see these two notions, so I really welcome just learning more around this.
I was going to say, yeah, me too, because it's not something really that I don't know. I'm not familiar with the concept of some type of ideology or philosophy behind that type of thinking, so I'm not the one to answer. It's new to me and happy to learn. So maybe Glenn's got more information, you can type in the chat, unless another panelist has more information.
Okay.
Perhaps
So
it's referencing like just digital maybe is like ones and zeros, and like there's a right and a wrong, maybe there's no gray area, maybe he's talking about that, whereas analog maybe offers more gray area. I don't know.
Yeah, so this idea of talking versus language, it's new to me. So I think Glenn, if there's any references, anything we can read about this, I think this is a very interesting notion that we can all learn about and be able to explore more deeply. So I'd like to just have the next question to Rhoda is, how do we ensure digitization doesn't create a further divide between humans and the natural world?
Oh my God, it's a big, with almost no warning, the right of education, for example, has become dependent of connectivity. We've seen that during COVID. Over 3/4 of national distance learning solutions who were available during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic relied exclusively on online platforms. So 465 million youth and children, or almost 47% of all primary and secondary students, did not have access to these platforms because they do not have internet connections at home. 47%. These, I can say that these mirror a global digital divide. And close to half of the world's population, some 3 billion, have no access to internet So these gaps is really significant. And as I told you, even in Canada, we have the divide between the urban and rural and remote. But in Canada, for example, we have the Universal Broadband Fund that's aimed to how do I say, to tackle that divide. But when it comes to some other countries, this is not the reality. So how to ensure that there is access to how do I say, digital innovation or internet, or how in access to ICT is another big issue, and there are underlying issues. For example, some countries can openly refuse to give access to their populations. So it comes to the rights of people. There are so many layers under that. It's not a divide between rich countries and poor countries. It could be also divide between democracies and in autocratic regimes. So I think multilateral organizations may have a role to play in that, in negotiation, in putting forward recommendations, in also supporting, in increasing funds available to develop in the digital literacy, the access to ICTs. And there is also a role that big corporations can play when it comes to that. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much, Rhoda. So John, I'd like to share Abhishek Bihani's question. Some of the UN SDGs relate to reducing wastage of food, water, and materials like plastic. What are your thoughts on making this goal not just an afterthought, but part of the normal decision-making for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at that question, and I've been thinking about how I would respond if I was going to respond, but it looks like I'm going to. The first thing that came to mind was the Nova Scotia, how we manage our waste in Nova Scotia, and how you inform sustainable behavior, and quite frankly, it's good policy, and it's good policy that with some rewards and perhaps some small sticks. So in Nova Scotia, we have sort of a world-class waste management program. We had a waste institute here at Acadia where they would travel to countries around the world, and it's I was quite surprised when I moved out here from other places in Canada, just how we did that. But and we actually take students to the waste management facility. And I wish we could do this with everyone, because when you see the individuals who work in these facilities, who work very hard, and if you don't clean out that peanut butter jar, it goes in the trash, it's not recycled, and someone's at the other end of the line taking care of that. But my experience is that policy is really, really important. And I did a trip to Sweden a number of years ago where we were looking at how they were influencing behavior around waste management, and in part what they did with this new complex is that they put the waste management receptacles out in a courtyard, not behind a building where people couldn't see how they were managing their waste, but they put it out in a public place, and so everyone could see when you were putting your trash out. So that helped influence behavior. So going back to the specific question, is that I think we would need policy around that. We'd need very, very strong education to support that policy, and that's really critical. We have a program called Planet Protectors, where our students every year, a small group, it's a credit, where they go to local schools and they talk about the waste management system in a very creative story-based narrative way, depending on the age group. They offer these programs at the waste management facility in our county. And so I think it's a collection of strong policy backed by strong education and also, you know, some enforcement. So for example, you know, if I don't sort my waste right, I get a big yellow sticker and they don't take it. So, I mean, those are some suggestions at working towards some of those critical issues.
Thank you very much, John. So, Kia, I have a question for you from Milton. He asked, how can we address the challenge of scale in these discussions and move the needle on them in the city, national, and international scales?
That's a good question. I'll think on the spot. I mean, certainly, like in terms of the work we're doing at council, we are, you know, looking at how to support, you know, individual artists, but also arts organizations that have very different needs than when we support individuals, as well as, especially with our new strategic plan, trying to create much more system-wide, you know, change. And I think we all acknowledge, like, change takes time. We are, you know, in our case, the council, we created in the 1950s, largely based on like colonial structures. So when we think about, you know, how we do things, how we approach problems, the grants and the programs we have set up, they have been based on some of those very you know, Eurocentric, I guess, views of art. So those are many of the challenges and assumptions that we are questioning right now, to say, how do we change up how we do it? And one of the things we've been thinking about is, how do we as an organization lead by example, and not just, you know, tell others, like the arts sector, how we would like to support them in the change, but how can we live that transformation and that transition ourselves, and know that it's going to be a hard journey. It requires us to be very humble. It requires us to look at issues that are very complex, to try to unpack them, and to work on them in holistic ways. So I guess one of the things I would say is, you know, we need to be persistent. I mean, these issues that we are tackling have existed for centuries, if not longer. They are deeply rooted. And I think we need to find different ways, whether it's at the micro level or the macro level, whether it's to influence policy, dialogue. You know, John mentioned kind of the importance of policy, as well as to put in programs and support for individuals or organizations to make changes in the way they practice, and to raise awareness at the societal level in terms of some of the challenges we're dealing with, that the Sustainable Development Goals are very much aimed to address.
Thank you. Ruda, you had your hand up. I just wanted to make sure I gave you an opportunity to chime in. You're muted.
Sorry, I just wanted to talk about Rwanda that achieved the no plastic bag in the country. And it was a mix of policy, enforcement, community engagement. So it's I think it's a model to follow.
Thank you very much, Rhoda. So we're heading towards the end of our event. We could go on this discussion, and I love the exchanges that are happening in the chat. And one of the things I just want to make sure that as we go forward, that we get a chance to get one last nugget from each panelist. So I'd like to ask each panelist a closing question. Do you have a preferred sustainable development goal? And why is it your preferred one? And how do you think digital can be used to raise public awareness about that particular SDG? Bonnie?
Oh, I thought I'd have a little bit more time to think about this. Well, I think probably the obvious answer for me would be number 4, in quality education. And for me, it's because that education, in whatever way you frame it, whether it's just formal education within the public sector, or if it's at home or out of school, but the opportunity to have an equitable, inclusive opportunity for everybody globally can solve many of the other issues if it's done well. And it is just so complicated. Digital, provided that the digital divide is managed, has demonstrated that in Canada, there will never be a snow day again for kids because they have figured out how to learn from home. It's opening up national networks, pan-Canadian networks for young people to speak with other young people. We've been using those to also raise awareness about Indigenous issues by getting kids working together outside of their communities. So I think digital can be very, very powerful for raising awareness about SDG 4 and for implementing an education system, provided we're very, very careful and thoughtful about the technical divide, for sure. But it's like a proud parent. I don't want to like favor one of them. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bonnie. Rhoda?
This is the same for me. Education is the basis for everything. If you want to tackle other sustainable development goal, you have to have that education that allows you to transcend the barriers and to transcend the limitation. So for me, it's important, and having and educate the SDG 4 education is the one that really represent the no one left behind. So it's that's it.
Thank you. John, do you have a preferred SDG?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this too, and I sort of the immediate one would maybe 14, life below oceans, but then I kept coming back to number 1, poverty, and in part, I feel that if people were to be able to move out of poverty, then that potentially leads to many things, and in terms of digital innovation, it could be, banking and commerce, social enterprise, collective action, raising awareness. Lots of things can help support people, countries, regions moving out of poverty. And I can't help but think that if someone is working hard to survive every day, that they have little time to work on other things as well. And I think coming out of poverty opens the doors for lots of opportunities. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Key?
Yes, well, I too struggled really to choose a preferred SDG. And I think Rhoda and Bonnie both made really compelling cases for education. But I'm going to abstain from choosing, because I really see these goals as like working together. I mean, it is hard to say, let us, of course, the individual, I mean, if we don't have a roof over our heads, if we don't have enough to eat, etc., it's hard to imagine how anyone could thrive and then be, a great contributor to society. Just as, we can't, there's a sense, we have an urgency. We have to take action against the changes that are happening in our natural world, on the climate front. So I think, the inequality, again, that's like permeates, when we think about like social economic conditions and how that intersects with, discrimination and, the urban rural divide, which we talked about. I think none of these things, I think I applaud the goals, because I think it's encouraging us to think about them in a system-wide way. And I think that's how we need to kind of approach the challenges as well as the goals that are before us with the SDGs.
Okay, Key, there's lots of pressure for you to choose one, but that's okay. I will accept your indecision as just wanting to be super inclusive. Ryan?
I think for me, just to be different, although it looks like I'm going to be the same as Allison in the chat, is number 17, the partnerships, because I think all of these, are only achievable through partnerships, and specifically community-led partnerships. And so the digital component of that is going to ensure that we can do those even from a distance. But as we move forward, thanks, Allison, appreciate it. I kind of want to get heckled though by Glenn. So if you want if you want to heckle me, Glenn, you're welcome to. But yeah, that would be me, is partnerships, because I think at the end of the day, all of these are going to require partnerships, and specifically community led. So thanks.
Thank you, Ryan. Jeff?
I'd agree that many are interlinked. Coming from the Maritimes, Atlantic Canada, obviously goal 14, life below water, is important to us. At the same time, the most urgent one I feel is goal 13. But then to please Glenn, I'll go above goal 13. But I would echo what Bonnie had to say about goal number 4, because I'm closely linked to that. And if we can just help build those competencies and the awareness across, all populations, then we're getting somewhere. And one way technology and digital can help with that is a few years ago, and maybe I was trying to solve my own problem, working with 4 different provinces here with different curricular outcomes across subject areas and grade levels. What about open sourcing and a national curriculum of some sort? And I know pros and cons, and maybe very what's the word I'm looking for? Controversial, right? We don't have a federal body governing education. I want to respect authority and autonomy of provinces and regions and localities and municipalities. At the same time, software developers use a platform called Git, like GitLab and GitHub, which is like a general information kind of transfer thing, where there's version control. So what if we, everybody hands-on developed a national curriculum? We could integrate all this stuff, and that might help bypass some of these long 2 to 4 year provincial curriculum cycles, and then the training of the teachers and resourcing for the materials for students and teachers to work with. So yeah, let's open source curriculum, and the best ideas kind of go to the top, and we have some type of partnership between provincial and national levels to decide, yes, those are good ideas, or maybe not yet. So yeah, that's my throw out there.
Thank you, Jeff. I'd just like to thank all the panelists for answering this question. And I know I've been asked what my response. So I initially was going to say 1, no poverty. And I realized John has already talked about it beautifully. And so I'm going to say gender equality. If we think about it, whether we think about STEM or STEAM, many girls and women in the world don't have the opportunities to fully be involved in the innovations that are needed to meet the SDGs in the next 9 years. And what we know is also empowering girls and women and allowing them to educate themselves allows them to have better family planning if they choose to have children, space their children out, ensuring that each child can be taken care of. And the importance of, if we just think of venture capital, I think it's like less than 10% of venture capitalists are women, and only 2% of funding of venture capital goes to women. And we can look at these numbers in many different ways in terms of what gender equality. And I remember listening to the founder of Project Drawdown, and she was saying empowering girls and women today could ensure that we have 1 billion less people by less than the end of the century, because women would have control over their capacity to plan for their families and be able to ensure that the children they do have, they can care for them as well as they'd like, and also be able to pursue education, community, professional, entrepreneurial goals. So I'd just like to thank everybody. The chat has been very lively, and I'd like to thank all the participants for their active participation. And so thank you very much, panelists, for joining us today. I know you're all very busy, and taking the time to be with us today was really a commitment that you made, and we deeply appreciate your presence and your sharing. This recording will continue to be shared so that we can increase literacy and action as we move forward. And so I would like to now pass it on and invite Alicia, the graphic artist, to show us the highlights in terms of what she's captured today. So Alicia, please. So I appreciate all the colors that Alicia has had time to add to this beautiful graphic representation of these last 2 hours we've had together. So really, in closing remarks, I'd just like to say we have come to the end of this first town hall in this series, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining us in this engaging discussion. And I'd like to thank again the panelists for sharing their wisdom and insights. Our second town hall on enabling cross-sectoral partnerships to drive sustainable innovations is next Wednesday, and I look forward to seeing many of you back here, and please invite more friends. And you can register from our Eventbrite portal or from the link that's going to be shared in the chat box. Thank you again, and please enjoy the closing song that we hope will inspire you as you scale your own literacy and engage in action towards the SDGs in the 9 years we've had ahead. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Can you hear what I'm saying, what I'm preaching, what I'm praying? That with all our voices ringing, we can change the world we live in for the better, for the good of all. Can you hear what I'm saying, what I'm preaching, what I'm praying? That with all our voices ringing, we can change the world we live in for the better, for the good of all. Give every child the right to learn, to read, to write, so that the light within her burns. She'll lead the way. Give every woman the right to live with opportunity, with equality, so she may give to the world all the gifts that are do. Can you hear what I'm saying, what I'm preaching, what I'm praying? That with all our voices ringing, we can change the world we live in for the better, for the good of all.
Give every man the right to be free, to be the best he can, to make his dreams reality.
He'll live in harmony. Let every creature and Mother Earth be recognized for their beauty and their worth. We'll be as one in the world. Can you hear what I'm saying, what I'm preaching?